In this section of the course, I'm going to walk you through navigating the interface of Lightroom Mobile and all of its tools. Now that we've gone through editing in the Photos app, you'll notice that Lightroom has many of the same tools. This is true for many editing softwares. However, not all softwares process images the same way, and even tools with the same name across different softwares will render that effect differently. This is especially the case with the exposure tool, which often lends much more natural looking results in Lightroom. Lightroom also allows for much more control over its tools compared to the Photos app. There is, however, a steeper learning curve when learning how to use Lightroom. In order to get started with Lightroom Mobile, you first need to download it from the App Store. It currently appears as Lightroom Photo and Video Editor, but they are changing this name all the time. If you want to be sure you're downloading the right one, check that the developer is Adobe. Once downloaded, open the Lightroom app and you'll be prompted to sign in or create a free account. Adobe will most likely prompt you to purchase some sort of subscription at this point, but you can skip past these prompts since all of the features that we're discussing today are included with the free version of the app. After doing this, you can navigate to the library section, which is found in the bottom toolbar. Here you can import your photos and sort your imported images into albums. This is where you'll come to select the image that you'd like to edit. To import an image into Lightroom, you can tap on the Add Photos icon in the bottom right of the screen, or if you're inside a created album, you can tap the three dots in the top right and select Add Photos from the list. From here, you'll be asked where you'd like to import your images from. If you select Camera Roll, this will show all of the images that are in your photos. Now you can tap to select which photos you would like to import, and once done, tap Add in the bottom right corner. Your images have now been added to your Lightroom library or selected album. Images that are taken with the Lightroom camera are automatically imported into your library. Lightroom Mobile has a very useful way to sort your images. Not only can you sort images by custom or smart albums, you can also rate your images on a scale of 1 to 5 and apply either a pick or reject flag. These ratings can be applied by selecting any image, tapping the drop-down menu in the top left toolbar that will probably say Edit by default. Here you can select Rate and Review, and all of the tools to rate the image will appear below the image. You can now scroll through your library and quickly rate your photos. Afterward, you can go back into your library or album and filter your photos by those ratings. Select the filter icon in the top toolbar, and here you can set the parameters that you would like to filter through your photos by. In order to access the Edit workspace, we can navigate to the same drop-down menu on any image and select Edit. Our editing tools will now appear along the bottom or side of our image depending on the orientation of our device. We can scroll to reveal more tools, tap on one of these icons to open its menu and access the various tools within it. What I really appreciate about Lightroom's editing interface is that the tools are categorized by the different editing processes that we discussed in section 4 of this course. All of the exposure and dynamic range tools are found in the Light menu. All of the white balance, color correcting, and color grading tools are found in the Color menu. This makes for a streamlined editing process and reinforces those foundational editing processes. Lightroom, similar to Photos, edits photos in a non-destructive manner. This means that you can apply edits to an image and change these edits at a later point or even revert the image back to its original form. While editing, you can also undo or redo your most recent edits by tapping the Undo or Redo button in the top toolbar. After tapping Undo, a little arrow will appear on the icon, which will indicate that if you hold the Undo icon, the Redo one will appear. You can also double tap a slider to reset that parameter back to 0 at any point. You can fully reset your image back to its original form by tapping the Reset button all the way to the right of the bottom toolbar. A menu will appear that allows you to revert the image back to different stages in your edit all the way up until when you first imported the image. Once you export an image outside of Lightroom, the edits are compressed and no longer editable. As long as you keep the original in Lightroom that you applied your edits to, you'll be able to revisit the photo and alter the edits at any point. In order to access Lightroom's presets, tap on the presets icon in the bottom toolbar. Here you'll see 3 different panels: recommended, premium, and yours. Since we're only covering the free version of the app, we're only going to cover the yours presets. Once you're in this panel, you'll see many more presets than what's available in Photos. As of writing this, there are 42 presets, plus 20 presets that are more selective one-tap edits. There are far too many presets here to explain what each does, so I implore you to explore each of these menus. Lightroom did a great job at titling these presets, so it should be pretty understandable. Once you have a preset selected, you can scale the intensity by tapping the slider icon on the filter's preview thumbnail. Here you can scale the preset from 100% down to 0% or up to 200% intensity. These presets are a great place to start an edit and then further refine with your editing tools. Once you've applied one of these presets, you can actually go through the editing tools and see exactly what it applied to your image. You can then alter these parameters fully. This is actually a great way to learn how to achieve certain editing looks within Lightroom. Back in the editing workspace, just to the right of the presets icon, we can see our crop section. If we tap this, we open the crop menu, which gives us access to all of our cropping tools. Similar to the Photos app, you can crop your image by dragging the edges or corners of the frame surrounding the image. You can also zoom and drag the image behind the frame, just as you could in Photos. The first tool that we see here along our bottom toolbar is the aspect ratio tool. Opening this will show all of our available aspect ratios. The most common for social media use are 1:1, 9:16, or 4:5. You can also switch between vertical and horizontal orientation with the icon in the top left corner. The next tool allows us to toggle between free crop mode and locked crop mode. Free crop will allow you to crop the edges of your image freely, whereas locked crop will force your crop to be uniform to whatever aspect ratio you've selected. Locked crop is preferred if you want the image to be a certain aspect ratio. You can tap the straighten tool to automatically detect and straighten the horizon of your image. Alternatively, you can drag your finger along the dotted line underneath your image to control the rotation to the nearest 100th degree. Realistically, it's very hard to control this slider to that small of an amount. I find that it jumps to roughly the nearest 20th degree. Tapping the rotate icon rotates the image 90 degrees counterclockwise. Tapping the flip H icon flips the image horizontally. And tapping the flip V icon flips the image vertically. Once you're finished with your crop edits, you can save by tapping the check mark in the bottom right corner. If you want to discard your edits, you can tap the X in the bottom left corner. Unfortunately, the geometry tools within Lightroom are a premium feature, so any geometry corrections on the iPhone will need to be done in Photos. More on that later. The next tool in order is the Auto Edit tool. By simply tapping this, we can apply an auto edit to our image. This functions similarly to Photos, but keep in mind that Lightroom is using a different intelligence, so it's likely going to give you different results. This is a great place to start your edit, especially if you're a beginner, since Lightroom actually shows you exactly how it changed your photos with all of its tools and allows you to further refine it or just see what corrections were made and learn from that. I've found that if you use this tool along with a preset, you'll most likely need to alter some of the settings. This combination of the two seems to produce an over-processed image. The next editing section within Lightroom is the light section, where we can make exposure correction and dynamic range adjustments. The first tool that we see is called exposure. Using this slider, we can increase or decrease the overall brightness of our image by up to 5 stops of light. When comparing this to the exposure slider in Photos, you can see how this one not only increases and decreases a lot more, but it creates a much more uniform brightness adjustment across the shadows, midtones, and highlights of your image. Next, we have the contrast slider, which increases or decreases the ratio between bright and dark elements. Again, increasing the contrast is a great way to make your subjects pop in your images. The highlights tool adjusts the brightness of the brighter parts of your image. An increase will brighten those elements and a decrease will darken those elements. The shadows tool adjusts the brightness of the darker parts of your image. So an increase is going to make your shadows brighter and a decrease is going to make your shadows appear darker. The whites tool adjusts the brightness of the brightest whites in your image. Increasing the slider is going to make your whites appear brighter. Decreasing the slider is going to make your whites appear darker. I find that decreasing the white slider can result in more color in your bright elements. It can also make your images feel more filmic. The blacks tool adjusts the brightness of the darkest blacks in your image. Increasing this slider is going to make your blacks appear a little bit more faded, and decreasing this slider is going to make your blacks appear more rich. If we scroll back up to the top of the light section, we can see a little icon in the top right called Curve. If we click this, we open the Tone Curve tool. This is one of the more advanced tools available within Lightroom, but with just a little bit of explanation, I'm sure that you'll be able to pick it up in time. The graph that's appearing in front of your image ultimately refers to the light in your image and can be used to control the dynamic range and contrast. Let's first look at the vertical axis of this graph, which refers to how light is output in your image. Points near the bottom of the graph will appear darker or black, and points near the top of the graph will appear brighter or white. The point at the bottom left corner of this graph represents the blacks in our image. By dragging this point to the top, we can see our image slowly fade into a pure white image. The point at the top right corner, which represents our whites, will make the whites appear darker as we move it down until we get a pure black image. The horizontal axis represents the original tonal values of our image, or the input values. At the very left of this graph, we have our blacks, and at the very right, we have our whites. The very middle of this graph is where our midtones are represented. In between our midtones and blacks, we can add a point which represents the shadows, and then in between our midtones and whites, we can add another point which represents our highlights. From here, we can continue to place points along this graph to manipulate more specific areas of our image. And that's really all there is to it. If you can understand this, you can start to see how this tool can be manipulated to control your image even more. Let's say that we want to increase the contrast in this image. Let's first open up the Curve tool. Then we're going to add points for our midtones, which are in the middle, shadows, which are in between our midtones and our blacks, and highlights, which are in between our midtones and whites. The grid lines behind this line will help you place these points more accurately. We know that contrast increases the ratio of bright to dark in our image. So that means that we need to make the shadows darker and highlights brighter. We also know that the closer a point is to the bottom of this graph, the darker it's going to make that area of the image. This means that we can drag the shadows point down to make it darker. Since the opposite is true, and the higher these points, the brighter they are in our image, this means that we can then go to our highlights point and drag it up, and that's going to increase our highlights. Through this, we've created more contrast in our image and produced what is known as an S-curve. You may be asking yourself, why bother when you can just use the contrast slider within the light section? The reason is because this tool allows you an extreme amount of control over which parts of your image get brighter and darker, and the overall tonal relationship between all of those varying tones in your image. You'll commonly use this graph to manipulate very specific areas of your photo that aren't exactly your shadows, midtones, or highlights. For our example image, an S-curve that looks like this is actually giving us a much better result. This amount of control is simply not possible when you're just using the contrast slider. This tool is definitely something to ease into if you're a beginner. I've actually only covered a very small portion of what it's capable of. The more advanced portion of this tool is manipulating color using the curves. If we scroll to the last icon, this is actually a pretty good place to start as a beginner. Rather than adding custom points along the graph, you can simply tap and drag a certain area of the line up or down, and it's going to do the rest of the work for you. This gives you less control, but is a great introduction to how this tool works. There are also a set of presets within the preset menu that will apply certain base edits to your curve. One of them being an S-curve, which we just discussed. The next section within Lightroom is the color section. This section has tools that are part of the white balance, color correction, and color grading editing processes. The first tool in the color section is the white balance tool. By tapping on the drop-down menu where it says as shot, you open up some options to change your white balance. If you're working with a raw image, you'll have some of the more common presets like as shot, auto, daylight, cloudy, shade, tungsten, fluorescent, flash, or custom. You can match one of these presets with the type of light that your photo was taken with, and your white balance should be corrected. After setting this, you can still fine-tune the white balance with the tools we'll mention in the following slides. If you're editing a JPEG file, you'll only have as shot, auto, and custom as options since the color information has been compressed into that file. Back in the color panel, you can also use the eyedropper tool to select a neutral gray in your image, and Lightroom will automatically determine the right white balance for your image based on that point. Below the white balance tool, we have a temperature tool which allows you to adjust the colors in your photo to be warmer or cooler. By dragging it to the right, you're going to introduce more yellow to your photo, and by dragging it to the left, you're going to introduce more blue. Tint just below it adds a green or magenta color tint to your photo. Dragging it to the right is going to add magenta, and dragging it to the left is going to add green. Vibrance adds saturation to your colors in a smarter way than saturation. Vibrance only targets the areas of the image that are less saturated and will prevent skin tones from becoming oversaturated. Saturation, on the other hand, adjusts the color intensity of all the colors in your image equally. If we scroll back to the top of the color panel, we can see that there are a few features that we actually skipped earlier. We'll first look at the Mix tool on the far right. Opening this panel brings up a menu that allows you to control individual colors in your image. You can see icons for reds, oranges, yellows, greens, cyans, blues, purples, and magentas. Once you select a target color, you can control the hue, saturation, and luminance, otherwise known as brightness, of that individual color. This is arguably one of the strongest tools within Lightroom and one of the biggest cases for learning how to use this program. This level of control is completely unmatched within photos and can quickly level up your editing. If you select the target tool at the top of this window, you can adjust colors directly on the image. This is a more intuitive way to identify and edit specific colors in your image. Once you've tapped the target icon, you can select either hue, saturation, or luminance. Then tap and hold in the image on any color that you want to change and drag horizontally or vertically to adjust those colors. You can see in this image that grass is a mixture of yellow and green, and when you use this target tool, you can edit both simultaneously. This target tool becomes very useful since you can select and edit all of the individual colors that impact a targeted area. Otherwise, you would have to go into each individual color manually and adjust the desired area that way. Be cautious when using this tool that you're not pushing your colors too much. When colors are pushed to extremes, there are often digital artifacts that appear or hard lines around the edges of colors. Back in the color menu, the icon on the far left converts your image to a black and white image. This is different from simply desaturating the image with the saturation slider because you can now actually go back into mix and control the luminance of the different colors in your image. This allows you greater control over how the black and white image is processed. Through this, you can affect the contrast of your image or fine-tune the exposure or dynamic range of your image. The last tool in the color menu can be opened with the icon in the top middle called grading. This is the area where we can apply color grading effects to our images. As a reminder, color grading is a creative process of coloring and tinting your images to create a stylized look. Within the grading menu, we have 4 different color wheels that we can slide between. The first one affects our shadows. Next is midtones, next is highlights, and at the very end, there is a global adjustment wheel. By tapping on any of the color wheels, we can fine-tune our color selection. As we drag our point around, we can select the hue of our color. And as we drag out towards the edges of the color wheel, we increase the saturation of that color. Below the color wheel, there is a luminance slider that can change the brightness of that color as well. If you prefer to use sliders, you can click on the drop-down arrow to the right, which will open up hue, saturation, and luminance as sliders. Beneath either the shadows, midtones, and highlights color wheels, you will see 2 sliders called blending and balance. The blending slider will control how much the color adjustments blend together. The balance slider will control whether the highlight or shadow color is more dominant. The 3-dot icon next to the title of each color wheel will allow you to reset the parameters, reset the whole grade, copy, or paste settings. This has grown to be one of my favorite tools within Lightroom. I commonly use this tool to create more color contrast in my images. The next editing menu in Lightroom is titled Effects, and as you may have guessed, the tools in this section are a part of the effects editing process. The first slider that we see is texture. This tool smooths or accentuates the texture details in your image. It concentrates on just the medium-sized details without affecting fine details. Decreasing the texture slider will smooth out details and is great for reducing the appearance of wrinkle textures on skin. Increasing the texture slider will accentuate texture and is great for any element that has interesting texture detail. The next slider is clarity. This tool affects the contrast edge in the midtone area of your image. This is similar to the definition tool in photos. Increasing the clarity of an image can make an image pop and appear sharper. Decreasing the clarity can make your image appear softer. The dehaze slider controls the amount of haze in an image. Haze appears when there are atmospheric conditions scattering light like fog, mist, or smoke. In these conditions, your image will have a lower contrast and reduced detail. By increasing the dehaze tool, you'll remove the effect of haze, resulting in a higher contrast and more detailed image. By decreasing the dehaze tool, you can actually introduce the appearance of haze in an image, resulting in a lower contrast, softer image. The vignette tool is another area where Lightroom offers much more control than photos. By adjusting the vignette slider to the right, you lighten the corners of your image. And by sliding to the left, you darken the corners of your image. Once you've applied a vignette, the sliders below it will become available for you to further control the characteristics of the vignette. The first slider, midpoint, adjusts the amount the vignette extends from the border of the image. Higher values restrict the vignette closer to the corner of the image, and lower values extend the vignette further from the corners. Roundness adjusts the shape of the vignette to be more oval or circular. Lower values make it more oval and higher values more circular. Feather adjusts the softening of the vignette's edges. Lower values reduce the softening and higher values increase the softening. Highlights controls how much the highlights are preserved when the vignette is negative or dark. This is best used for photos with small highlights like street lights or lamps. The grain tool at the bottom of this menu allows you to apply a stylistic grain effect that is similar to the grain found in many film stocks. The grain slider controls the amount of grain in your image. After adding grain to your image, the following sliders will become available that allow you to fine-tune the grain's characteristics. The first slider is called Size, which controls how big or small your grain is. By default, the slider is set to 25. As you increase this, your grain is going to get bigger. As you decrease it, your grain gets smaller. The next adjustment is Roughness, which adjusts the regularity of the grain. Increasing the roughness will make the grain appear more uneven, and decreasing the roughness will make it appear more uniform. This tool is mostly used to a stylistic effect, but some photographers also use a little bit of grain to give them the appearance of a sharper image. The next menu within Lightroom is called Detail. This section includes all of our detail adjustments like sharpening and noise reduction. First, we have the sharpening tool, which increases the edge definition of your image. Dragging this slider to the right will increase the amount of sharpening applied. You'll see on the slider that there is a red zone toward the end of it. This is a guide warning you that you've essentially gone too far. Depending on how soft your image, it may sometimes be necessary to push this tool quite far, but in most cases, try to steer clear of that red zone. It's useful to zoom in on your image when applying sharpening so you can better see how the details are being affected. While holding and dragging the sharpening slider, you can tap and hold the screen to show a black and white filter, which helps you see the sharpening effect a bit easier. Once you've applied the sharpening effect, the following tools will become available. First, we have Radius. This controls the size of the details the sharpening is applied to. Photos with fine details will typically need a lower radius, whereas photos with larger details will need a larger radius. Using too large of a radius will typically result in an unnatural effect. While holding and dragging the radius slider, tap and hold on the screen with another finger to show the edge radius. Detail adjusts how much high-frequency information is sharpened and how much the edges are emphasized. Lower values will primarily sharpen edges to remove blurring. Higher values can make textures appear more pronounced. While holding and dragging the detail slider, tap and hold on the screen with another finger to show the effects of the detail slider more easily. Masking controls a mask for the sharpening section, which can control which areas are being affected by sharpening adjustments. At 0, the entire image receives the same amount of sharpening. At 100, sharpening only affects the strongest edges of your image. While holding and dragging the masking slider, tap and hold the screen with another finger to see the areas affected. The areas that are affected appear as white, whereas the areas not affected appear as black. The next tool in this section, Noise Reduction, controls the luminance noise in an image. A higher value will reduce more digital noise, but will start to smooth out details. The detail slider allows you to fine-tune the amount of details in your image. A lower value will give you a cleaner result, but remove detail from the image. A higher value will retain more detail in your image. It's best to zoom in to an affected area when using this tool. Look for the darker shadow areas. The following tool, Color Noise Reduction, works in the same way as noise reduction, except it targets color noise. The next panel in the Lightroom editor is called Optics. Within this menu, we have two edits that we can toggle on or off. The first tool is called Remove Chromatic Aberrations. A chromatic aberration appears as a color fringe along the edges of subjects and will commonly appear along the edges of subjects against a bright backlight. The next tool is Enable Lens Correction. This tool detects the lens that the image was taken with and will automatically apply the proper lens correction. This is something that I use with every single edit because it gets rid of the distortion that's inherent and unique to each lens. The next panel allows you to save different edits of the same photo. You can do this by tapping Create Version in the named section to name and save your current edit. This is a great feature if you want to test different presets or different looks on your image and compare them later without having to redo all of your edits or have tons of copies of the same image. Lightroom will store all of these different edits for you within this one image file in this panel. You can scroll through and select to view and apply different versions to your image. Lightroom also automatically creates versions of your edit at significant points through your editing process. This is a great backup feature that allows you to quickly go back to a certain point of your edit instead of tapping undo a bunch of times or having to revert all the way back to the beginning of your edit. Lightroom also allows you to copy and paste your edit between photos. You can do this from the editor or the library window. From the editor, tap the three dots icon in the upper right corner and choose Copy Settings. A pop-up menu will appear that allows you to choose exactly which edits you want to copy. Once finished, select the check mark in the top right. Now you can navigate back to your library, select a single photo, tap the three dots icon again and choose Paste Settings. Or you can select one or multiple photos in the library view and tap the Paste Settings button in the bottom toolbar. This is very useful when you have a series of images that were taken in the same light and location. This way, you only need to focus on editing one photo, and then you can paste this among all the rest. And then from there, you might just have to make little tweaks to each individual image, but that's going to save you lots of time not having to start from scratch with every single one. All of your edits are auto-saved within Lightroom. At any point, you can revisit your edits within Lightroom and tweak the parameters as long as your original file is not deleted from your library. To export an image out of Lightroom, you can select an individual photo and tap the share icon in the top toolbar. You can also export more than one image at a time by selecting multiple images in the library view and then tapping share. From here, you have the option to export to camera roll, which will save your image in photos, export to files, which will save your image to your iPhone's files, or export as. This is going to allow you to select the exact image file settings, which is great when you want to export your image for social media use. On this slide, we have a list of some of the premium editing features that are missing in the free version of Lightroom. Most of these are advanced editing processes anyways. In my opinion, the biggest loss is the geometry tools section, since I find myself using this a lot, and Lightroom's geometry tools are much better than photos. Truthfully though, I'm not sure that that would justify buying an Adobe subscription. You can always do your geometry adjustments in Photos and then import that photo into Lightroom from there. I put an asterisk next to raw editing because according to Adobe, the free version of Lightroom Mobile doesn't allow you to edit RAW files. However, Apple Pro RAW seems to open up fine in the free version of Lightroom Mobile. The free Lightroom camera also allows you to shoot in DNG and then edit those files. So I think this limitation is more so talking about RAW files that come from much larger format cameras. That concludes this section on the editing tools within Lightroom Mobile. Congrats on making it this far in the course. I know the past two sections have been a little dense, but you should be proud that now you have the knowledge of two editing softwares under your belt. I hope in the past two sections, some of the basic editing processes were also reinforced for you. In the next section, I'm going to discuss how to approach editing, and then we'll revisit all of those best editing practices, and I'll give you some more practical tips and tricks to get better edits on your photos.